So this typically only affects larger things. But if I can't steal the cert, if I can't break into the machine and steal the cert, what else can I get out of that? Well, it turns out you can do this, for lack of a better term, double DNS rebinding, where in certain circumstances where you have cross-site scripting and wildcard certs, not cross-site scripting on the main domain, but cross-site scripting on a different unrelated subdomain. It's same domain, different subdomain. So this is the banking website, and this is their marketing website that's over SSL, over SLTLS, but it's not secure. It's like, who cares? Like, even if it got broken into, with the exception of the wildcard cert, there's really no value there. So having a cross-site scripting in there, maybe it's useful for phishing, maybe I can override a cookie or something, but other than that, really not that useful. In certain circumstances, let's say I want to attack, let me give you a concrete example. Addons.mozilla.org. Let's say I wanted to break into that thing, and I'm man in the middle, and there's somebody who has access to addons.mozilla.org. Well, let's assume they use something like secure cookies. They're smart guys, right? They probably use secure cookies. And they're not going to, because they don't want anyone to downgrade you using Moxie Marlin Spike's tool. They've basically done everything right. There's no cross-site scripting there. You know, let's just say it's secure. That subdomain is secure. Now let's assume they have a different subdomain called mxr.mozilla.org, which exists, and that has cross-site scripting on it, and it has a wildcard, and it doesn't care about host headers. So it's sort of a trifecta of kind of weird things. So it still doesn't seem like that really give you much, but it can. So in this example, the man-in-the-middle controls everything except the SSL connection itself. So they can't man in the middle, but they can't man in the middle the SSL connection, but everything else. So here's how it works. So the victim requests the IP address for addons.mozilla.org, and the attacker modifies the DNS time to live to 1 second. So basically gives them the exact same DNS packet they normally get, except it's modified to be 1 second instead of 30 minutes or whatever it is. The victim logs into addons.mozilla.org. This is where the login detection becomes important, because I don't want to do this attack until they've logged in. I want them to have that cookie. It's very important. So at this point, the attacker firewalls off the IP address to addons.mozilla.org and forces the URL to go to addons.mozilla.org. So this is where the cross-site scripting lives, except it's the wrong subdomain, if you notice. It's not MXR where the actual XSS lives. It's the wrong subdomain. It's very important. So this particular example, you actually have to do clickjacking to get it to work. They've actually fixed this cross-site scripting hole, but yeah, this is a real example, by the way. The host name is wrong. But the reason this works is because it uses a wildcard cert, and it doesn't care about host headers. So sure, it could be addons.mozilla.org from its perspective. It has no reason to believe it's not. It's not programmed to say it's not or do anything different. So it just magically serves up the same content it would normally serve up on mxr.mozilla.org with the wrong subdomain in the host headers. So the victim requests a DNS for addons.mozilla.org because they're firewalled off and they can't make the request. The attacker sets DNS TTL for 1 second again, but this time they return the IP address of MXR instead of addons.mozilla.org. The victim runs a cross-site scripting in context of addons.mozilla.org. Still doesn't give me anything. So if the attacker, if the addons.mozilla.org doesn't use HTTP only, sure, I could pull out the cookie in JavaScript space. But again, let's pretend that they're secure and they're not going to do that, right? They're smart guys. They're not going to do that. Well, at this point, I basically turn it on its head. I say, okay, I want you to rebind again. So I firewall them off. I unfirewall them from the previous firewall instance. I force them to rebind back, and they request the addons.mozilla.org IP address again. The attacker delivers the IP address for addons.mozilla.org. The victim's cookie is sent to addons.mozilla.org, which I still can't read, but now it's in context of the right IP address. So they're really on addons.mozilla.org. They're really sending real content, but now my JavaScript is running. So I have a beef shell or whatever that can see or download or whatever, and I have complete control. I can do whatever I want, upload content or whatever. So I talked to Mozilla guys about that. They fixed the XSS, but they're like, well, why would we ever look for cross-site scripting on a domain that we don't care about, their search thing? Well, this adds kind of an interesting extra dimension if you're like doing like PCI audits or whatever. You actually do need to check every single subdomain that's under that domain, especially if they're using SSL, because they could either steal the cert or they could do something crazy like this. What are the chances of them doing something like this? Well, I talked with Ivan Ristic, who's done a bunch of SSL metrics, and he said about 10% of certs are wildcard certs, and let's say 80% of websites have XSS, so 8%. And then I was talking with the CISO Andy from Akamai, and he said, and because they're the ones who host a lot of this stuff, and they said, well, they always respect host headers. So let's say it's anywhere between 2 and 4% is probably a good guess of sites that would be vulnerable to it. Unfortunately, they tend to be very, very large websites that tend to be vulnerable to it. For instance, Mozilla.org. So one of my guys, he's like, I was telling them in this example, he's like, well, thank God I use Perspectives. Perspectives is a tool in Firefox that's supposed to say, okay, well, if you have a whole bunch of different people telling the centralized server what they saw when they went to a certain domain, well, you can check and see if you've been man-in-the-middled. They can either do it, for packet, it's really meant for packet forensics. See if somebody is man-in-the-middling you and actually changing the cert. Well, what the problem is, it's really easy to detect that this plugin is installed because it's making a whole bunch of HTTP, interestingly enough, HTTP requests out to the server. So you're thinking, well, how does that really help an attacker? I mean, if they're running it, knowing that it's there doesn't really give you much because you're going to not do, you're just not going to do the attack. Either way, the good guy wins, right? Because you're not going to do the attack. Either you get caught doing it or you're not going to do it. Well, that's not really true. The problem is it only checks the parent domain. It doesn't check any of the embedded content. So if they're, like a lot of sites have static dot or whatever, static images, JavaScript, CSS, well, as long as it's CSS or JavaScript and not images, I don't really care about images, but as long as I can modify the DOM with objects or whatever, I can basically take control over that page and inject anything I want on it, see what's going on, read the content, and so on. So if I'm a true man-in-the-middle bad guy, I don't need to man-in-the-middle the primary domain and get caught. I can man-in-the-middle the static content that's being included and get basically the same thing. So we tried this against the wildcard cert concept that we just talked about, and it gave like a little frowny face or thumbs down or something in the corner, and it's a little red thing. It's really hard to, unless you're really paying attention to it, it really is not a big enough visual cue to let you know what's going on. And by the way, if you actually look at all the kind of default stuff inside Perspectives, it's really not designed, it's basically everything that should be checked isn't checked. It's all kind of backwards. So I don't recommend this tool for protecting yourself. There's another one called SS Elvis that just came out. Someone told me about it. I have not had a chance to check it. I bet it has a lot of similar issues. This technology needs a lot of work before it's going to be fixed.
So Microsoft research said, in fact, as far as we can determine, there's no evidence of a single user being saved from harm by a certificate error, anywhere, ever. Thus, to a good approximation, 100% of certificate errors are false positives. Now, people could counter this and say if there were no warnings, then man-in-the-middle type attacks would be far more rampant. In reality, I think Robert and I agree more with the Microsoft research guys here. More importantly, we still don't think that helps because a user can click through the warnings. Most users are kind of trained, certificate error, okay, right? Or there's ways to use the warnings to an attacker's advantage. So really, they don't help. Which leads us to the next slide.
So we want to try to figure out a way, how can we actually use this warning to an attacker's advantage? And because it really, if I'm going to man-in-the-middle somebody, if they click through, I win. If they don't click through, it's probably because they've caught me. So how can I check and kind of get that information out of them about what sort of user they are? Well, let's say, remember that previous example where I had YouTube, which is SSL YouTube. Well, if I gave you a link to SSL YouTube, you're probably going to click on, what's the worst that's going to really happen to you? Rickroll you or something? So you probably click on it. Maybe you won't click on it if I send it to you, but if someone of your buddies sends it to you, you think it's your buddy anyway, sends you HTTPS youtube.com, and you're a security researcher, you'll look at it and you'll say, well, yeah, it's weird. I'll check on it. Oh, it's Google. It's Wildcard. So Google clearly can't make a website. But it's no malicious stuff. It's nothing bad. It's just bad web design. So that kind of person is going to go through that flow extremely slow, because they're going to go and check and figure out what's going on. Whereas a typical user will go through it very fast. Yeah, I want to see the midgets or whatever, right? I want to click. So by measuring the timing difference, I actually inferred what sort of user you are, and so although I didn't man-in-the-middle you at that point and actually take control of that SSL session, of which it was not useful anyway, because it just redirects you back to Google, which is odd. But anyway, because it's YouTube. But the user who goes fast, I now know, and future times when I want to, on his bank or whatever, I can put my snake oil cert in there or whatever. Who cares? He's going to click through it super fast because it's that kind of user. And there's a much lower chance of me getting outed because I was able to test and see what sort of user you were ahead of time. Pretty cool. So,
all right. So fear, uncertainty, and doubt aside, be aware. There's probably way more issues here than we've found or discussed today. That said, we spent about 5 months looking into this, and if we found all these issues, just imagine how many other issues are out there.
I've got a full-time job, by the way. This is just part-time stuff. You know?
So someone who actually spent the time actually enumerating all these issues, going through all the different vectors, they'd probably be rewarded with dozens of additional issues.
I actually believe it's more like in the hundreds. I don't have any proof or anything, but if you think about all the plugins and all the weird stuff that websites do, and encoding issues and all the stuff you can inject, and flash cookies which have their own potential issues, and so on and on and on and on, I believe there's probably more like hundreds of things left to find. So good for researchers.
And it's probably worth mentioning once again, you still need to be a man in the middle for any of this stuff to work.
Yeah, I talked to a couple of reporters and they're like, well, yeah, but how do you do this? Well, the only time SSL ever matters is when you are a man in the middle. So you sort of have to take a leap of faith and say, okay, somehow they got in the middle. I'm at an internet key. I'm at DEF CON, right? So someone's in the middle, and I don't know who it is. The last mile is the dangerous part. If they're not in the man in the middle, there are so many easier types of attacks anyway. They probably not opt towards any of these types of things. They still could, and I think there's you could probably write tools around all these concepts and build a lot of this stuff out without having to do this by hand, which is what we were doing. I really don't want people to go away and say, oh, the sky's falling. It's really not. It's not that bad. You should still use SSL TLS. It still is a okay security mechanism, not for a determined attacker, but for a lazy, passive person who's just seeing what data you're sending in clear text. It gives you protection from that kind of guy. But with proper tab, ports, cookie sandboxing, and better SSL, TLS, padding, and jitter, a lot of these issues could go away. Unfortunately, yes, this definitely does mean you absolutely have to upgrade all your browsers and all of your web servers to get to the next version of whatever that version would have that would introduce this extra padding and jitter. That also means extra latency on the internet for all this SSL, TLS traffic and so on. But it really, it's pretty frail right now. Let's put it that way. Yes, there needs to be a lot more sandboxing in the browser. Again, browsers are very frail. They were never designed to have this mixed content stuff and still be secure. They try to be, but realistically, there's just no way for them to do that appropriately. So either use a completely separate browser or you're kind of screwed.
So with that, I think we have about 3 minutes for questions, if there are any.
That is amazing.
All right.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.